how much does it cost for a tiny pixelized picture on Bitcoin? And he told me that it was a couple $1,000s. Even though the initial Bitcoin narrative using DA it's okay, but it seems that there's a very important prerequisite problem that we haven't solved, which is the computation limitation.
Start thinking, started working on some of the most hardcore projects, Nubit, to bridge the gap between the missing pieces and the real-world use cases.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fractal Podcast. Today we have a really, really special episode with Professor Yu Feng and Hanzhi of Nubit. I'm super excited to have them on today and to share with us a little bit more about what they've been cooking, what they've been working on. But yeah, as usual, as you know, I'm Spencer Yang, one of the core contributors of Fractal Bitcoin. We do this podcast. We try to do it regularly because we just find it's a really good and awesome way to showcase the best of the Bitcoin and Fractal ecosystem. So yeah, Professor Yu Feng and Hanzhi, do you want to give our viewers an introduction?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. And my name is Yu Feng. I'm a founder and CEO at Nubit. I'm also a CS professor at UCSB, where I have been conducting research in the space of programming languages and blockchain security. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm Hanzhi. I'm one of the co-founders of Nubit, and I'm also a PhD student at UCSB, where I do research in zero-knowledge proof and blockchain.
Nice. Super awesome to have you. I think based on, my understanding of your background and also how we've been communicating over the past, couple of months and years, it feels like, you guys are some of the most technical, in terms of understanding things that's happening on Bitcoin and so on. But before that, we'd love to hear a bit more about how your journey actually led you into crypto. What brought you into building crypto in the first place?
I think I can get started. First of all, I think it started from my time during as a junior PhD student. For instance, I started my PhD at UT Austin in 2013. And at that time, my first research project was doing malware detections. Malware detection for basically detecting malware for Android, where we build tool and program to detect all those kind of nasty, malicious app that can potentially steal your credit card or social number or try to delete your file, etc. And at that time, we have to. This is a project sponsored by DARPA, and then we have a lot of server, like cutting edge server, to run those analysis. But at one day, I realized that one of the machine was being hacked. And how do I realize that it was hacked? Because I noticed that I didn't do any computation, and then there's a thread that occupied majority of my CPU power. And I was very curious about what's going on. That's my incentive as a PhD student. And I realized that, and I tried to Google, and then I realized that I actually was infected by one of the malware which trying to piggyback your machine. It can be as powerful as a server, or it can be as simple as your cell phone, and to steal your computation power for doing the mining. And once I understand what's going on, and then I try to do some reverse engineering to basically doing the same mining, but on my own behalf. I think that's where I get my initial Bitcoin. But it was just some number, right? At the time, we didn't realize that it can be a digital gold eventually. At the time, it's just some number. And then it's just like some coin or virtual digital concurrency that you get from your online gaming. It was until when I was about to graduate, it was around 2018. And then at that time, I think Bitcoin was already around $8,000. And then that's the first time I realized, this is actually some digital concurrency actually worth some real concurrency, some real values. And then that's why after I graduate and become the faculty and then decide to perform research in this field and try to dive a little bit deeper. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's the true OG proof of work, right? Where you are forced to do proof of work and then you ended up doing proof of work yourself. That's awesome. That's a great story. Thank you. What about you, Hanzhi?
Yeah, as for me, I first entered the crypto world in 2020 when I was just an undergraduate studying phone verification. So I basically started out in blockchain security, where I focused on identifying and mitigating bugs in smart contracts. And in 2022, I joined blockchain security startup called Veridice, which is founded by Professor Yu Feng, and where I lead several CK projects including like writing proofs for different foundations projects. And during that time, I dive deep into the ZK research and gains many hands-on experience in building blockchains.
It's awesome. It sounds like you have worked together for a long time as well. I guess maybe just a curveball question for y'all is, what was your first impressions of each other when you first met?
I think I can get started. I think the first impression is that before I actually recruited Hanzhi as PhD students, I actually recruited him as the summer intern of my security startup. At that time, I tried to give him a very, very difficult project, whereas the topic is to formally verify the ZK project from Ethereum Foundation. Because at that time, people just get started to use ZK. It's around 2022. And there's only a very, very few people understand how to write ZK circuit. Not mention that we have to reason about the correctness of those circuits, as well as prove that whatever you wrote in the circuit is actually mathematically correct with respect to what you are supposed to do. And at that time, so this is basically the first project I assigned to Hanzhi, and then it was quite surprised that he managed to write down the entire formal proof for the, I think, Semaphore project. It's a very, very well-known project developed by Ethereum Foundation, and that's turned out to be one of the first formal proof for the ZK circuit. And then after that, it's just a no-brain decision to recruit Hanzhi in my group. I just try to secure this talented student as soon as possible.
Yeah, for me, regarding the internship, it's basically in early 2022, I was just an undergraduate, right? So I posted on Twitter looking for summer internship, and Shu Mo, co-founder of Libra, suggests that I should apply to Professor Yu Feng's startup. And I looked into that startup, and my first impression was that what Professor Yu was doing was so cool, and I wanted to join them. So basically, I applied, and I got the position. And basically, that decision shaped my journey of the next 3 years.
Wow. Yeah, it's super nice to kind of see this interaction, right? And kind of hear the story of how you really got started. Sometimes it's just when you were putting out this energy out, right? Like this tweet out, who knew what happens, right? But you actually did that. And I think you acted on the advice of people as well. And I think you also rose to the challenge, right? And I think Professor also was he was very, very certain of what he was looking for as well, right? With the particular challenge that he gave you. And I think that's really nice that, you kind of worked out. So I'm really happy for you all as well, that you're able to come together as a team. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then in terms of I think, in terms of the interest to building Bitcoin, right? I think the Bitcoin ecosystem has really flourished over the past 2+ years. What was in your mind as well, what brought you to focus on the Bitcoin ecosystem as a direction? Because I think, as you mentioned, you were previously focused on slightly other directions before within the crypto ecosystem, right? So what brought you into the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, I think for this question, because Hanzhi, I'm his PhD advisor, but in terms of Bitcoin ecosystem, Hanzhi, he's actually the mentor who led me to the Bitcoin ecosystem. So I would let Hanzhi to take the lead on this.
Yeah. So basically, I think it was in early 2023. So I began exploring the ecosystem, the Bitcoin ecosystem, and I maintained some stats domain, stats names, and some BRC20 at the very beginning. And so basically people started issuing tokens and NFTs on Bitcoin, which I think this idea is really wild. So I sparked my interest and made me start thinking what's the missing pieces for Bitcoin. And later on, I joined the youth group and started thinking, working on some of the most hardcore projects, Nubit, to bridge the gap between the missing pieces and the real world use cases. So basically, we want to the Bitcoin is the largest digital asset, and we want to put this digital assets into work. And so we are trying to make Bitcoin more than just a currency. And that's why we basically started Nubit and started contributing to the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think when you all first started Nubit, I remember the vision at the beginning for the first iteration. And I think most startups have multiple iterations, right? I think your first iteration was really around doing a Bitcoin DA service. Could you elaborate about that? What did you learn along the way, and how does that actually help you to also define the work later on in the company's journey as well?
I think I can. I think it was the end of 2023 where at that time, I was a little bit tired of 2 years of providing securities auditing services to the Ethereum ecosystem. At the time, I was trying to take a break. And then I asked Hanzi, other than Ethereum ecosystem, what else can we do? Right. And then he told me that because at that time it was close to the end of the bear market. He said that, right now people are crazy about BRC20 and audit. And then let's take a look at the Bitcoin ecosystem. And then I asked him, how much does it cost for a tiny pixelized picture on Bitcoin? And he told me that it was a couple $1,000s. It was a couple $1,000s for buying a picture. And I was trying to figure out why it was so expensive, right? Like I can generate like a much high resolution picture in my computer or my cell phone. Why is it so expensive for doing that on Bitcoin? And then he told me that, hey, it was because that's digital gold. And that's the difference between, let's say, you buy a truly LV from, let's say, Paris versus like the one from Xiushuijie, right? And so that's why, like, I realized that. So right now, well, it's great that people value their like those tiny picture and want to pay this amount of money. But on the other hand, this also raises a concern, right? Because like as more and more people jump into the ecosystem, and what happens if there are more and more transactions that is going to dump onto a Bitcoin mainnet? And this is not going to be scalable because like a Bitcoin can only handle a couple, like a few dozens of transactions per like 5 minutes. So this is not going to scale. So that's why the first reaction we're trying to build is that why can't we just offload those kind of storage, those kind of transactions on a side chain? But it's very easy to build a side chain, right? But the problem is that why do people want to store data on your side chain, right? Like people only want to like authenticate your side chain if you can achieve the same degree of features on Bitcoin, which is censorship resistance and economic security. So that's why that's the first narrative we start with on Nubit, which is trying to build the first Bitcoin native DA. And then after that we finish 3 rounds of fundraising, and the investor and people are very excited about that. And then we also like finish several rounds of testnet. But after that, we realized that similar to other like a DA from different ecosystem, we ran into the issue of product market fit. Because like a lot of ecosystem, even though they might have the need on offloading their transaction to a DA, but the problem is that right now they cannot even properly perform trustless computation on Bitcoin. Because they cannot perform trustless computation, so which means that because they cannot even start with the first step, and how do we convince them to do the second step, right? So as a result, if you look at what's going on with the Bitcoin ecosystem, especially for those L2, almost all of them end up with building their own centralized server or centralized sidechain to generate like transaction on their own chain without talking to Bitcoin. So that's why we realized that, well, even though the initial like Bitcoin narrative using DA it's okay, but it seems that there is a very important prerequisite problem that we haven't solved, which is the computation limitation. And I think that's also the relevant problems that Fractal trying to solve as well, but in a different like style.
It's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate kind of like highlighting the initial kind of like problem that you all were experiencing from like observation of the market, and also like just understanding what are you more uniquely positioned to solve, right, compared to other teams. And then as you kind of like go into that journey, you are also then sort of like iterating, getting feedback, and also better understanding, right? In some ways, you have gathered more information because of the involvement and additional work over the past n number of months and days. And then what happens is that now you have a much clearer idea, and then now that also like translates to future work that your team is working on right now. That's awesome. And then in terms of like, I guess, I noticed that, of course, many people probably who follow your Twitter account and so on probably know that, recently the Nubit team has been involved in BitVM research and also published the white paper for the Goldinals standard and protocol. So we'd love to hear a bit more about like what sparked your team's interest in this particular area, and also what was the journey like, to work on this particular white paper?
Great question. This is actually relevant to my answer to the previous questions. As I mentioned, originally we tried to solve the second step of the problem, and we realized that the second step of the problem cannot be kicked off without solving step one, and which is the computation limitation. So that's why we think that, and then at that time there was no good solution that we can directly use. For instance, even though the initial BitVM was proposed by Robin Linus last year, and then he proposed a second version this year. But if you download his current product, even his current product is still far, far away from practical. And so we try to dive into BitVM a little bit, and then which also simultaneously extended our narrative from the initial Bitcoin native DA into truly work computer for Bitcoin. So what do we mean by work computer for Bitcoin? It includes CPU, which is, you can think of, it's powered by BitVM. You can think of it's a mechanism, it's an off-chain mechanism that allow you to do tooling complete computations. At the same time, the computation also being certified by the Bitcoin mainnet. And so this is the CPU that we build. And then also we have memory and storage, because if you're relying on the storage on the register, that's going to be very expensive. This is similar to the Bitcoin mainnet. So as a result, that's how we connect to our initial narrative about building the Bitcoin native DA. However, if we just build the CPU as well as the storage and memory, it's just like you have a very fancy cell phone, but without any software, right? It's going to be a useless machine. So, but we are a very small team with limited resource. We cannot build everything, right? So at the time, we were trying to think, so what's the most important things that we can do with the work computer, right? What's the first thing that I typically install on my new computer? I think those are some grounding, like a file system or the grounding format. And we realized that we don't have this kind of standard in Bitcoin ecosystem because of limitations of Bitcoin script. Similar to, for instance, in Ethereum or Solana, you have some token standard like ERC20 token. And then this simple, tiny ERC20 token actually become the foundations of the empire of Ethereum or Solana. But we don't have this kind of a token standard in Bitcoin. Well, we have a whole bunch of token access, but they are kind of pragmatic. Like we have hundreds of access, Bitcoin native access, but they're kind of very, very pragmatic. And mostly it was caused by the limitations of the Bitcoin script, and then people try to bypass those kind of limitations, which can lead to a bunch of weird tweak and solution. So that's why we realized that I think the first thing we need to do is we need to come up with a truly ERC20 token, but for Bitcoin. But the moment we jump into that, we realize that this is completely non-trivial, because it's not like you implement those like 4 tiny functions in ERC20 token in Ethereum, and Bitcoin, they don't even have a memory to remember your state, right? It's like 1 year's like newborn baby who only know like hungry, crying, and that's it. So at the time we spend a lot of effort, and then we identify a lot of challenges, and then we think that, well, probably it might be valuable to actually write this down, not just to raise like the interest from the industry, but also like raise the interest from academic, because we actually need a lot of help, not just from existing builder in industry. We also need a lot of help from the academia as well, because that's where there's a lot of innovation and there are lots of big brain can come into play and then help us. Yeah, that's how it leads to the first paper from Nubit about Goldinals.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think when it comes to the motivation and also the problems, right? I think what strikes me as quite interesting is also like how you all went back to first principles and then realized that there's a problem, and then you feel like, hey, there's an opportunity for you to publish this and work on this because no one else has actually done this, and to kind of like set a bit of a signal out to the industry. And I think to your point, attract other like sort of giga brains and also awesome development teams to also start paying attention to this particular problem and see what else is possible. I also noticed that in the white paper, and I think maybe like just for people who are not as familiar with BitVM, we'd love to hear from you and maybe Hanji as well. How would you kind of explain this sort of like project Robin Linus did to the regular person? How should they be thinking about this? And also, how far along are we right now in stage? Are there any dependencies on Bitcoin or whatsoever? Like, what is kind of the path forward for BitVM as well?
How about you take a shot?
Yeah. So basically, like too long to read. BitVM is basically smart contracts on Bitcoin. So you can like enforce complex computations on chain, and basically it can support like any computation you want. You can encode this computation in some CK proofs, and these CK proofs can be validated on chain on Bitcoin. And this is very powerful. It can like actually enables a lot of new use cases, such as asset protocol, such as staking protocol, so many like use cases. But like right now, the implementation is quite hard. So it takes like, let's say if you want to put like Groth16 verifier on chain, which only takes 200 lines of code in Ethereum. But like for Bitcoin, when you try to compile this verifier to the Bitcoin script, it will cost like gigabytes of data. And you can't just put this on chain. It will be extremely like large and like inefficient. So there are main teams working on this part. So we need to build a proper compiler for ultimately compile this high-level code into Bitcoin scripts, and also like split it into multiple subscripts that can be deployed on Bitcoin. And this part, like we have like basically last year we have like working prototype, which can basically manually split all these Bitcoin scripts, and it can be deployed on Bitcoin mainnet right now. But like the whole process is like very manual intensive, and basically like all the teams are working on some like more proper way to deal with it. And I think we are heading towards the final or the proper version of BitVM right now.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I can add a few sentences to about BitVM to general audience who has literally zero technical backgrounds. You can think of it like a highway in LA, downtown LA, in the sense that, let's say, we know that like rush hour in downtown LA is going to be very crowded, and then there's a traffic jam everywhere. And similarly, like in Bitcoin mainnet, by default, the throughput is very low. And you don't want to put all those transactions and computations on Bitcoin. And also the computations of Bitcoin is also quite limited. It's like the newborn baby example that I use in the sense. It's not like Ethereum. The language in Ethereum is like adult, whereas the language in Bitcoin is like newborn baby. It's not like, it's still a human being, right? It understands what you're trying to express. It's just like it finding a little bit hard to convince Bitcoin to understand what you're trying to do. So which means what you can do with BitVM is that you can actually do the computations somewhere else, right? Just don't bother me. Like you can do the computation somewhere else. And those computation can be as complicated as possible as you want. It can be DeFi, it can pump.fun, whatever. But in the end, so this is similar to when I do a take-home exam, right? I give you an exam, give exam to different kind of student. You can do exam at home or Starbucks or whatever. But in the end, so when you finish, you have to turn in your solution to the teacher, to the grader. And in this case, the teacher who is going to grade you is going to be a verifier deployed on Bitcoin. So that's the whole mechanism. So which enable you to enjoy this kind of a tooling completeness off chain, because you can do whatever you want off chain, right? Why being backed by the Bitcoin security? Because eventually those information will be submitted to a verifier on Bitcoin instead of an off-chain indexer. Now it's going to be the verifier on Bitcoin. But right now, as Hans mentioned, that we're still very, very far from fully prostructurality to enable full-fledged version of heavy lifting application because of the fundamental limitations of not just computation power of Bitcoin, but also like the limitation of existing tool chain. For instance, even though there's a grader, there is a verifier who trying to grade your assignments on Bitcoin. But think about this grader is going to be a newborn baby, right? It's going to be very slow to grade your work. And then it's also going to be very expensive. That's the illustration I want to add to make it slightly accessible to general audience who has no context about BitVM.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's one of those things where like I think there's a space constraint. There's a Bitcoin block space constraint as well. There's also this like the script capabilities sort of constraint. And also, as you mentioned, a lot of the other tooling kind of constraints as well, right, over here that you kind of have to grapple with. So that's kind of why sometimes to a, I would say to a slightly less technical audience, they might find that, hey, like all these promises, why is it not being delivered today, right? I think it's really helpful to understand that these limitations that, people have to appreciate to bring some of these solutions to the audience. And also like we're not even talking about the coordination problems that we need to do, right, when it comes to new standards, right? I think you're involved, for example, like I think you saw feedback from like Domo, with one of the creators of BRT20. I think he probably was also very aware of like, what it takes to, help a standard get adoption, right? I'm sure. Is there anything that you can share with the audience as well on how you think about standard adoption in general in Bitcoin, and also how this kind of can affect interest in Goldinals, in BitVM, and other kind of like mechanisms.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, like creating a new asset portal is especially on Bitcoin, it's no small task. It's basically you need to design it very well. You need to find out the optimal approach and balance the cost and decentralization, and then comes the implementation. And after all the implementation, you need to deal with the like political concerns. So basically on Bitcoin, so first for the implementation part, you first need to like work with UTXO instead of like a state machine model like Ethereum, which is more complex to manage. And also like when you are starting the implementation, the Bitcoin testnet isn't great, right? Because like you cannot even get like a testnet token. And like the public RPC services has many limitations. And also the block times. The block times for Bitcoin is basically 10 minutes. And like testing a single transaction on Bitcoin can take up to 10 minutes. What does it mean? Like you can only do like multiple dozens of transactions every day. So it doesn't really make sense. So, and for Bitcoin asset protocol to get like mainnet adoption, it basically like it can contains like extensive social coordination. Like you need to coordinate with the OG, with the like all the Bitcoin holders and miners, and basically we need to support like secure the support from like wallets, marketplace, and RPCs, all these public services. So the whole process is like politically like not easy, but we're getting there. And like it seems like this protocol also is like will be live on Fractal. And so basically building with Fractal is much simpler. So like politically it's much easier. And also like Unisat offers like robust infrastructures. It's very easy to get KSN tokens. And the block times is just like 30 seconds or so. So it's dramatically accelerated the development.
Yeah, I do appreciate the shout out too. I think like overall, on the Fractal ecosystem side of things, we try to be the experiment and also a bit of a playground, right, for Bitcoin developers looking to build like cool and fun stuff. I think overall, as you mentioned, there's some parameter differences with Bitcoin. I think that does help, developers to make it a little bit more friendly for, for working on stuff. And also, I think for the Fractal Bitcoin network, because we enable the opcode OPCAT as well, it does enable like some additional capabilities that, of course, are still being in discussion in the Bitcoin core and also the Bitcoin mainnet kind of discussion groups. And we'll see where those discussions do end. Right? I think we do have a point of view, but it may not be the right point of view. Right? It's one of those things where I think at the very least it does create the opportunity for developers and also awesome teams like yourself to run some awesome interesting things as well that you kind of envision, right? So that you at least have this economic sort of feedback loop from the users, the communities, and various stakeholders before you kind of brings out into a broader audience. So that's kind of what I do. I think we are able to provide as well to developers like yourself. So I appreciate y'all kind of like shouting out that piece. Yeah, I think like in terms of like after you have like published the Goldinals standard and also so on. In terms of like after you've published the Goldinals standard and so on, has there been any like unexpected insights or feedback from the Bitcoin or Fractal community since you've launched Goldinals?
Yeah, absolutely. So since we launched the Goldinals whitepaper, so we have received tons of feedbacks. So basically, like some users have called this 情史 protocol of Bitcoin, which means it represents the unification of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And at the same time, others raise some concerns regarding transaction costs and like how Goldinals compare to other or existing protocols like ERC20 or Ruins in terms of like efficiency, decentralization. So basically, we have done like tons of research like to answer these questions. So basically, like I think like these discussions are all very relevant for us. So basically, they show the community is engaged and like thinking deeply about what Goldinals brings to Bitcoin. And yeah, it's super excited.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely feels like a lot of the feedback you probably have anticipated, right? But I think like based on the feedback, you also get a sort of a bit of a better sense of what part of the concerns seem more elevated compared to the others, right? Maybe like my question is really around unification. Right? Did you hear what kind of feedback did you hear from like people who are very involved in like runes, very involved in like BRC20s, very ordinals? Like I guess people who are already quite interested in the standards. What have you heard so far that maybe is a little bit different from the other audience, or is it kind of pretty much the same?
Yeah, I think like Goldinals, it basically represents a step away from the like zero-sum thinking the space has had. So basically, we are trying to bring the liquidity, bring the interoperability for all these existing asset protocols like Ruins, like BS20. So far, like all the community members are very excited. They think like this protocol can actually revive the whole assets, Bitcoin native assets ecosystem. And because like it both have programmability and it can like unifying all the asset protocol in one protocol, which means they can directly bridge their assets to this protocol and start trading with the advanced programmability that we can provide. The overall like feedbacks from the community we really see is like pretty positive.
What can users expect about the next steps for Goldinals as well? What do you think will happen? Like if you would have like a bit of like a crystal ball gaze into the future, what would you kind of say is what will happen next? Yeah.
So for the next step, so basically like we just released our white paper and we are working super hard to release the testnet version and the mainnet version. And I think for the like the next couple months, we have been developing a method to unify BS20, Ruins, and other Bitcoin assets under Goldinals. And we are working on a plan to basically significantly improve liquidity for these protocols, for these assets, which can like it's definitely what all members want. And beyond that, we are also trying to bring more like use cases and like real world use cases for this protocol, like Goldinals based stablecoins and like Bitcoin LST protocols using Goldinals, which means you can like directly hold this LST on Bitcoin instead of like on Ethereum or Solana. So yeah, I think like the Goldinals protocol itself will secure like a significant share of the Bitcoin asset protocol ecosystem.
I think a lot of people do have the impression that, and I think you mentioned this earlier as well, right? About how it takes to build on Bitcoin. I think as you sprint towards testnet and mainnet as well, I'm sure you also encounter the same problems, right? Including also like bringing on new team members into your team. So I guess like, is there anything that you have learned so far, or like they can share with the community about like how can they best build on Bitcoin? What kind of like talents or awesome people should they be looking out for? And how can we help the new builders entering the ecosystem to build better and faster?
Okay, yeah, because right now, if you directly brought developer into the ecosystem, it actually has a very, very high bar because the developer have to work with Bitcoin script as well as a programming, not just a very, very restricted, limited programming model, but also a very, very restricted execution environment. And this is actually highly, highly like a challenge for any junior programmer. So that's why on one side, I think before we actually start to massively onboard builders, I think one of the prerequisites that we should be building is to sort out the pipeline. I wouldn't say like sort out everything because that's need to be like done in a like incremental way, but at least some basic like a pipeline such as compiler or like something that is a little bit friendly IDE for building Bitcoin applications and like debugging or testing. Right now, everything is actually quite hard. And then so that's why right now the best one of the like work way that we think that it's relatively effective is it's similar to how I hire Hans 3 years ago, is that we tend to start with some internal like challenges, like a problem. It can be a tiny sub problems on top of what we already have, and then we try to hire some talented students from all over the world and from the US, China, etc. And then we ask them to do some internship with us and then try to solve those challenging problems and see if they have the mental power for doing so. And then once they can like doing this kind of challenging job, and then we think that probably it's time to like tell them the rest of this challenges stack. But on the other hand, I think but also the entire community should be pushing a little bit faster on the tooling side to make lives easier.
Yeah. So basically, like writing Bitcoin script today feels like working in assembly. So it's super manual, it's super slow, no optimization. It can take months to basically write something, and you are stuck doing like compiler optimization by hand. So we definitely need more like infrastructures, more tools for developers.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things where what I've noticed is that with many ecosystems is that the more retail attention or speculation or whatsoever you call it comes into the space, then the more I think a lot of venture or like, community funds do get like, built. And then that also incentivize builders, right? So it's like this like whole flywheel that kind of needs to fly out. And in some ways, I think it's kind of interesting because of like the whole like Ordinals BRC20 wave, like 2023, that brought like awesome talent like yourself, Hans, and Yu Feng, Professor Yu Feng, into the space, right? And then now, I think you guys are now also like championing and also like sort of shepherding the way forward for like the next sort of wave of developers. And I think, I do expect that maybe a lot of times these new teams or people in the space, they would read like the white papers that you guys have been putting out and also like looking at the implementations and whatnot. And like, I'm actually pretty inspired, right, to solve more problems here. In the crypto space recently, there's also this whole wave of like, like other kind of narratives, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's applications. And I think what you may have seen and heard as well in recent CES, every demo was like, filled with AI and so on. I guess like, do you think that AI actually has a role to play in crypto and Bitcoin? Or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I can comment this a little bit because my PhD thesis is about using AI to write code, what we call program synthesis. It was like using AI to write code. But let me tell you a quick story. When I started my thesis back in 2014, I think my thesis was driven by a grant from my advisor from DARPA. At that time, military from the US, and then they tried to fund like research in the University of in the US to do research to say, hey, if we have all the code in this world, right? If we have all the code in this world, can we write better programs? Can we write like correct program that is bug free? And that time when I started this, my thesis, everything was thinking this is a joke because that's not going to happen. No one is going to believe that. Because at that time, what AI can do is pretty limited. It's pretty limited because of one is data. Data is quite limited, and especially high quality data. And second, the computation is also quite limited. But as we can see right now, nobody say that this is a joke because everybody is crazy about that. And then, so before we talk about whether like what's the narrative between crypto and AI, I would say that outside crypto, because right now probably everybody is very obsessed with crypto, but forgot to realize that there was a much, much bigger work outside, including academia as well as like other industry. So I would say outside crypto, I think AI is already reshaping the entire world. Like for instance, AI is, I think the Nobel Prize of Physics as well as chemistry all goes to people relevant to AI. And then so in academia, for instance, like not just Nobel Prize, in computer science, for instance, AI is reshaping every single subfield, no matter you are working on security, software engineering, or V as a like programming language and verifications, or database, operating system, all the field are being like reshuffled by AI. So based on those, I don't think crypto is going to be an exception because AI is just fundamental like a productivity that is going to speed up everything. Just like, for instance, previously, there was no card, right? There's no card, and then I ride a bicycle. But now you have a car, so no matter how bad the car is going to be, it's definitely going to be faster, and then increase your productivity of communication. So that's why I think AI is going to reshape crypto world as well. But like when and whether like we are going to have some killer application, it's going to be depending on the innovations of the builder in this world. For instance, we already have see some like AI like product that already achieve like product market fit, such as AI XBT, right? XBT right now it's truly like I think there will be, because of like this way of new AI and AI XBT, I think there will be a lot. I would say that there will be more and more innovative product that is going to reshape the world on crypto, including Ethereum, Solana, and Bitcoin. Yeah,
I think that's a really nice to kind of hear also, like you have this like, previous background in AI, but then now I think like with AI just being like everywhere, right? Like it's almost like you have to be AI, driven or thinking by default, right? And I think that's awesome. That's a really nice rallying call as well to any builder in the space to not kind of ignore it, but really try to figure out how can that be part of the, whether it's product execution or whether it's like part of that narrative, or maybe like even the way you run your Twitter accounts, right? Like AI. Maybe we'll see a Nubit bot coming up soon, or a Nubit intern run by AI soon. I don't know.
Yeah, we do have an intern, but it's still not fully like deployable yet.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, in terms of like also like some other observations of the ecosystem, I noticed that of course your team has been calling out all the actors and also like trying to make sure that the space is also more healthy moving forward. Is if you have like a magic wand, is there anything that you can share with our community, what you want to see in the Bitcoin ecosystem? I guess in the next 1 year, I just keep put it this way. In 2025, what's kind of your personal, wish for what you want to see in the Bitcoin ecosystem this year?
So as for me, like I definitely want to see a soft fork happen on Bitcoin to enable like even greater programmability and reduce like costs and improve the efficiency for like our tech stack and also like for all the other protocols. And I also want to see like the BitVM itself improve like regarding the efficiency so that we can watch like the BitVM based applications gain traction and like those mainnets. So basically, I think for the past few years, the Bitcoin ecosystem has been like entered a phase of like rapid experiments and iteration. And we have seen like the Goldinals, ES20 rulings, BTC5, all these innovations. So finally, we can like have this BitVM down and get real programmability on Bitcoin mainnet. And I think the future of Bitcoin is just getting started. And like these kind of technologies can definitely improve the transparency and also the like trustlessness for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think I have two wishes, but I think none of them is as ambitious as Hanzhi. The first one is on the technical side, right? On the technical side, I'm not expecting like some dramatic like a magic happens. Let's say OPK enable gigantic soft fork. As long as there's any way that we can reduce the block time from 10 minutes to 1 minute, I think that's already a huge improvement for the entire ecosystem. I think the second wish is not on the technical side, but on the human and ecosystem side, because we know that building system on Bitcoin is actually quite challenging. And then we also, as individual projects, founders or builders, we are also quite limited in terms of capabilities and manpower. And there's only a certain amount of things that we can do. But we realize that right now, if you look at what's going on with the Bitcoin ecosystem, like it's actually very, very decentralized. It's actually very, very decentralized and truly censorship resistant in the sense that you can build whatever you want and then nobody is going to judge you. And this is great, but this also sometimes can lead to low productivity because, for instance, there's a lot of teams they might end up with working on the same topic, but they don't talk to each other. And then there's a lot of product team they even start to fight again with each other, right? And then so this is a little bit different from like what we've seen from Ethereum foundations, from Ethereum or Solana, right? Because they all have their centralized like governance mechanism, like Ethereum foundations, with like some leadership to tell them, hey, this is a direction we should be building. I think that's also, there's a pros and cons on that aspect. There's a pros and cons on that aspect in the sense that what happens if you make the wrong decision, right? Then the entire ecosystem is going to lie the opposite, right? But what I'm saying is that it would be nice if we can have some kind of a balance between those two. In some sense, I think we still keep like decentralized. In some other sense, it would be nice to have some kind of a collaboration, like truly collaboration, not just shake hand on Twitter or shake hand on blog posts, right? Like truly collaboration in which like people from different teams can actually sit down and then including writing paper or like addressing some of the challenging problem in this domain so that we can push this a little bit faster. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's a really nice summary of like how I view, like the ecosystem as well. And I would say like both of your wishes are actually fairly ambitious, but in different ways, right? I think like so your wish is actually super ambitious because it's like human, right? And also like the Bitcoin community. And then Hans, I think your ambition and also your wish over here has a lot of technical, complexity as well, along with, of course, the human coordination size. But yeah, I really appreciate your kind of at least sharing your thoughts about what you wish for. I think directionally speaking, I'm sure many folks in the ecosystem feel the same way as you about some of these things. And I do hope that, some of these progressions will actually happen this year as well for everyone. Yeah. And I think maybe that's pretty much most of the things that I did want to catch up with you all today. I really enjoyed, talking to you about, your journey, your personal journey, and also your company's journey. Also how you have been, innovating, and also your wish for this year. I guess before we go, maybe just anything you want to kind of share with the audience, anything additionally, and maybe how do the audience follow Nubit? What you're working on. What is the best way to get in touch as well?
Yeah, so we just released our white paper for Goldinals last week, and we will release the way for our community members to participate in this protocol next month. So stay tuned, follow our Twitter, join our Discord, and looking for our new announcements.
Yeah, let's unify the entire community from the Bitcoin ecosystem, and let's make Bitcoin great again.
Awesome. Can't be said better, team. Thank you so much for coming on the Fractal Podcast. We'd love to, of course, have you on in the future again, once we have awesome new updates to share in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.